Hello, welcome everyone to another Friday Fireside Chat. We are really excited to have Saskia Garner from the Susie Lamplug Trust join us. So I just want to give a quick wrap up of the week and then we'll get into our wonderful guest. So it's been a busy week. There's been a lot of campaigns going on, and I know it's been a noisy time in the news. So if you haven't seen that, that's kind of part of what we want to highlight here. So today, first of all, is World Kindness Day. So try to do something kind to someone if you can. We think that spreading kindness really starts to mitigate some of the harmful and hateful behaviors out there. So if you can do that, that would be great. It's a challenge for you today. And earlier this week on November 10th was National Personal Safety Day in the UK. And this is some of the material that we'll be talking with Saskia about. They had ran their cyber safety at work. So really excited to talk about that. Of course, we had Remembrance Day. So again, remembering all of our veterans and the people whose lives were impacted by violence and war and all of these horrible human rights atrocities. So I think this is such an important time that I really also we try to integrate into our team to really remember why we're doing the things that we're doing. And finally, some really interesting news is the EU has their first LGBTQ strategy. And there's a couple key points. If you haven't seen it, we'll be posting about that later. But the policies for all EU member states will be focusing on fighting discrimination in the workforce, ensuring safety, so especially around hate crimes and other protective characteristics of discrimination and hate, as well as protecting the rights of rainbow families and asylum for other people in this community from other countries to come into EU states. So this is a first, and it's really exciting to see some of the progress that is happening in this area. But without further ado, I will welcome our guest. So Saskia has over 15 years of experience in human rights advocacy, policy, and research, as well as development work in grassroots NGO organizations all the way from Nepal to Tonga, which I'm like really excited to kind of hear a little bit more about her work. So she's done work for Amnesty International, Refugee Action, and now she's the policy officer for Susie Lamplug Trust. And we'll be diving in. So welcome, Saskia.
Hi, Gillian. Thank you so
Hi.
much for inviting me.
Of course, great to have you. And I'm sure there's, way more to that bio. So please, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and really what kind of brought you into this field?
Of course, sure. So I've been with the Susie Lamplugh Trust about 4.5 years. So I'm the policy and campaigns manager there. So mainly working on our personal safety campaigns and research, which I'll talk to you all a bit more about in a second. But also I work on stalking. But prior to that, as you mentioned, my key focus really has been human rights. So I spent a few years working for Amnesty International on their South Asia desk. So looking at issues around all kinds of human rights violations in Sri Lanka and Nepal predominantly. Got to travel there, which was a wonderful experience. Also did work with Refugee Action, looking at the experience of refugees moving through the whole asylum system in the UK and trying to influence the Home Office around improving the experience for them and lobbying for change there. But my first job was actually with Minority Rights International. So again, really looking at marginalised groups all over the world, not just in the UK, but understanding what the challenges are that they face, and also helping to run training courses to enable them to advocate for their rights at various international forums such as the UN and also within Europe. So yeah, it's always had a kind of campaigning thread, but also backed up by research. I've been lucky enough to do field research with Amnesty in countries such as Bangladesh and Nepal. And prior to that, actually, you mentioned that I spent some time in Tonga. That was actually on my year in between graduating and
Oh,
starting work. So that was with an organisation called Students Partnership Worldwide. So I was involved in working with local charities, building up capacity then, helping with funding reports, things like that. I think I just sort of picked the place that was furthest away from the UK on the globe and thought that's where I'm going to go and spend a year of my life. Yes, and also linked in with my studies. I did social anthropology at Manchester. And that got me really interested in worldwide cultures and different experiences, and also the human rights violations and issues going on there. And then went on to do a master's in international relations. So very much an
wow.
international focus,
Yes.
but linking to a lot of the themes that I'm working on now at the Susie Lampley Trust.
That's amazing. And as you know, as someone who's traveled quite frequently, especially in working in even developing countries, I think although we're like, oh, that's far away, we do see a lot of mirrors and similar issues, if not, certain minority groups who've come into um, the country like UK, those issues still continue, maybe not to the same extent, but
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
that was what was so interesting about working with refugees and knowing a bit about some of the experiences of the countries they were coming from, and then seeing the experiences they had here. So trying to sort of link up those ties, and I suppose what interests me in through all those jobs really in the work that I'm doing now is sort of lobbying for change at a systemic level. So trying to
Mm,
influence that kind of change at governmental level, and influencing policy and legislation where it's possible to do so.
that's amazing. And I mean, all of the things that you've mentioned, those are really difficult, probably heartbreaking at times, issues that
Mhm.
so what actually got you interested in stalking, harassment, other personal safety issues and human right concerns?
Well, I suppose my travels at quite an early age. So I went off to Nepal when I left school and spent my year there teaching English and working with local charities there, and really seeing the kind of disparity between um, sort of levels of poverty and the marginalisation of certain groups. I suppose that kind of really brought it home to me at that point. But I've always been interested in work around issues of violence and harassment, particularly against women, both from an international perspective, but also in this country. And I think what interested me about the work of the Susie Lampley Trust is there's such a broad approach to tackling these issues. So some of you might know that we run the National Stalking Helpline, which is a frontline service. So that's there to help support anyone who thinks they're affected by stalking. We have an advocacy service there where people can get specific help over a period of time as well. But we also train an enormous amount of people, thousands of people every year across all kinds of organisations, sectors within the police and other authorities around personal safety, but also stalking, so raising awareness. But that's part of the legacy, actually, of the Susie Lampley Trust that was set up by Susie's parents. And I'll mention her story a bit in a moment, but that it was one of the key things they wanted to really do, is to sort of raise awareness about these issues and give people the skills and tools to address them in their everyday life. And
Mhm.
that's the legacy really that we've got within the trust. We're in our 33rd year now, so
Oh wow.
um, but also obviously the campaigning and research on key issues that we want to change in regard to helping people feel and also be safer. So it's partly about raising awareness and sort of informing people's decisions about what the safety situation is in relation to certain issues, and then if there are personal decisions they might want to make around that. But also we are involved in the policy side and the lobbying side, so trying to come at it from both angles really.
Yes.
um, but just
Definitely.
briefly to mention that for those who don't know, I mean, Susie Lampley was an estate agent back in the 1980s, and she went off to meet to show someone around a house. It's just a normal part of her job, and unfortunately, she never returned. And there just weren't processes in place at that point to sort of buddy someone throughout the day. Obviously, there weren't mobile phones. There was no real system to check that she was or wasn't okay. And it was only really to the end of the day that her colleagues noticed she hadn't come back from the appointment and started to raise the alarm, spoke to her family and the police. But really, by that time, quite a few hours had passed, and
Mm.
that, we'll never know what happened to Susie. And, she was declared dead a few years later, but her body was never found. And I think that really motivated her parents to, I mean, in the most sort of admirable way, turn an absolute tragedy into something positive to set up the trust and try and raise awareness and prevent that situation happening to anyone else, really.
Yeah, it was incredible. And just before we jumped on live, I was saying, in support of the National Personal Safety Day, I was looking a lot more into Susie's story and as well as her
Mm-hmm.
parents, and it just really hit home, how fast things can change. And as you
Mm-hmm.
said, like the systems that really, we still need so many other ways to improve the system to prevent something like this from happening. Um,
Yeah, yeah, that's
yeah.
right. And one of the things I've really sort of has motivated me at the trust is being able to sort of direct research in areas where there hasn't been much precedent. So
Mm,
one of the projects that I worked on early on was looking at the safety checks on taxi and minicab drivers,
yeah.
and kind of looking across the board because the licensing requirements are the same. They're set by the licensing authority, the local council, and they're the same for taxis and minicabs. But I did a piece of research which highlighted that there's quite a number of licensed drivers who are holding convictions for violent offences, and some of those are quite recent. And many of those were known by the licensing authority when they employed them. So we put out a report around that and a set of recommendations. And then we were invited to be on a national task and finish group to put forward a set of recommendations to the government to sort of implement change. And we recommended that legislation is needed because currently guidance isn't adequate, it's being ignored, there's inconsistency.
So
So
many
that's kind of,
licensing bodies all over, like
yeah, and
300.
they're all sort of
Yeah.
setting their own criteria. It's very confused. So if somebody gets in a taxi in Glasgow, they don't know whether the safety checks have been the same as somebody in London because it's very disparate.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things I worked on at an early stage and worked with family members of those who've been affected by attacks by taxi drivers and things like that. But I guess that's one of the things I feel proud about working at the Susie Lampley Trust is bringing together multiple organisations. So talking to the likes of yourselves and other organisations that work on personal safety issues and stalking and violence against women and girls, and also just safety issues more broadly. That's what makes me feel proud, really, is bringing people together to sort of implement change at a systemic level.
That's amazing, and it sounds like you've done so many important pieces of work so far in only 4 years, specifically at the Susie Lamplug Trust. What are some of the yeah, you mentioned, being proud to do that. I mean, what are some of the findings of the research? I know specifically around COVID, there's been a
Mm-hmm,
lot of,
mm-hmm.
perception, but also, different forms of personal safety issues that really come to the surface. What
Yeah,
have you been
yeah.
involved in? Could you share a little bit
Yep.
more?
So right at the beginning of lockdown, we held our National Stalking Awareness Week, which we have every year. It's normally in April, and we really had to change the focus of that around within a couple of weeks because, we'd planned a physical sort of convention, and everyone was invited along. We were going to have speakers, and suddenly we had to turn the whole thing online. But what we realised was that there was concern amongst victims that support services might be interrupted due to the lockdown and due to people being told that they had to work from home. So a lot of our messaging around that time was reassuring victims that our service was completely continuous, it was not going to change at all, and that the crime of stalking was still going to be prioritised by the police and others, so to absolutely continue to report that if people felt able to do so. So we put out some guidance around that. But then similarly at the beginning of July, when the retail sector started to open up and we were aware both early in lockdown that there had been incidents of violence and aggression against frontline workers particularly, but also then with retail opening up, there was a concern that would continue, but we were also aware of the safety of people working from home and
Mm,
trying to emphasize to employers that they still have a duty of care to ensure that their employees are safe and well when working at home, particularly so they won't have that network of colleagues to tap into on a daily basis. So we put out some guidance and advice around staying safe while working at home, and that referred to our workplace safety charter, which we developed last year, Susie's Charter for Workplace Safety, which you can find on our website. And that's really a framework for employers to engage with employees around all aspects of personal safety. So risk assessments, safety procedures, reporting, making sure that you really feel that any risks in your work have been identified and planned for.
mm.
Um, so that's one of the things that we really focused on. And then more recently, you mentioned we had our personal safety day this week. Um, we wanted to, following on from our work around workplace safety and the charter and the kind of physical side of safety, we really wanted to emphasize the importance of online safety.
Mhm.
And we published our research, which unfortunately shows that a third of people are currently affected by cyber abuse at work. So, during all their online interactions and communications, and 80%, over 80% felt that that kind of abuse had escalated during the lockdown. So I think this really shows how those kinds of behaviours, aggression, harassment, stalking, that there might be perceptions that those kinds of things might decrease during a lockdown because people aren't out and about so much, but actually they're just transferring online.
Mm,
And we're really concerned that employees are getting the right support to address those issues, to identify them, to set boundaries. So we put out in our report, again, which is on our website, some safety advice, such as really looking at the online safety policies of your employer,
mhm,
checking your online privacy settings, not sharing passwords, and reporting the incident to the police and your employer so that you can really get the support you need. And also seeking help from support services. If you think you're being stalked, contact the National Stalking Helpline, those kinds of things. So
mhm.
to reassure people that we know that safety issues will continue during the lockdown, and we're here to provide advice.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because we live in such a digital world and we can't really now disconnect ourselves from, our use of technology, whether you're in a physical space or you're,
Completely.
in your home, there's different risks that are going to carry out, and now it's now interwebbed with, the technology and different forms
Yeah.
of abuse or stalking.
Yeah.
I do remember, I can't it was something around the reporting of stalking incidents. How many times before someone felt that they were able to report?
Sometimes up to 100 incidents before someone thinks, I think this is bad enough for me to report it, because there's just such a normalization of this kind of behavior, unfortunately. And as you will know from your own work, it's really countering that perception that, to a certain extent, aggression, harassment, abuse is just part of the job. And we see that across so many sectors. People are so committed to their jobs, they just want to get on with their work, they love what they do. And so, but they're concerned about raising issues around their own personal safety for fear of being seen as incompetent or causing trouble, or being dispensable. And all those issues are of great concern to us, and we always encourage people to try and come forward, to start that conversation with their employers,
Mm,
and to refer to us or the likes of Susie's Charter if they want a point of contact, to say, actually, this is external advice. I'm not making this up. This is a charter that's been developed. We consulted with the unions and the police and many different organisations. So we really feel like that's something that could work for everybody.
that's so important because you do need those packaging to feel that, even if you're on your own, that you might have someone else, like a third party or authority, to speak to what's going on. And if something doesn't feel right, you don't need to put up
That's
with
it.
it. Like, this is
Go with your
by law.
instinct, and yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, just
Yeah.
if something doesn't feel right, just act on it, and and get help from a specialist organization, or even just telling someone in your family to start with, and then go from there and get the support you need.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think that's really important because COVID, as you said, like people think, oh, well, you're in the safety of your house, and now actually some of these issues of domestic
Mm-hmm.
violence, really
Yeah.
showcasing that, hey, the home isn't somewhere that's always safe for people. Um,
Not for everyone, unfortunately, no. And actually, on our personal safety day on Tuesday, we released the latest in our series of podcasts, which people can find on our website. And our CEO, Suki Barker, was talking to Emma Short, who's associate professor, and she specializes in cyber stalking and online abuse. And she was saying that, the boundaries are very blurred now, where we're entertaining a multitude of people in our own homes. The time scales around when we begin work and when we don't are blurred, because we're literally sitting at our kitchen table. So there's not the arriving in the office and leaving the office and that kind of cut-off point. So for a lot of people, they're struggling with establishing those boundaries. Managers are texting them at 8 at night on WhatsApp, and what's acceptable and what isn't. So trying to encourage employers to set out those boundaries clearly, so people know what isn't okay, and then seek support when they don't feel safe.
that's great. So, I mean, you're involved in so many aspects of, personal safety issues, as you mentioned, stalking and COVID and, employee responsibility and national guidelines. Like, what is your hope that your legacy that you could leave behind if, you're finished your career and you can look back and go, yes, I did it. I did this one thing that really helped advance. There might be a
Oh,
lot, but
thank you. Well, actually, what interests me the most, and one of the things I enjoy the most, is actually bringing together multiple stakeholders to work towards a kind of joint aim, really. So working with the likes of yourselves and other organizations that have similar aims and ambitions, we're trying to achieve similar things. Consulting with people to produce something like the charter, like we did, really means a lot to me, to get multiple people involved in achieving the same aims. I think that's just something
do
that
a
I
lot
hope to
more.
continue to do. Yeah, both on the taxi work, but the workplace safety and the online safety as well. But just raising awareness really about some of these issues. Sometimes people don't fully understand the nature of stalking, that kind of fixative, obsessive nature, that it's not easily fixed. It's not easily addressed, even with criminal sentencing, although that's obviously part of it. But just kind of providing a space for people to discuss these issues, to highlight issues of concern, and really trying to implement change at a sort of legislative and policy level, really.
That's amazing. And we hope to get there, it's slow, incremental, but we know that,
Yeah,
with more partners, with more people seeing
exactly. Yeah,
the scale of the issues, in very
yeah,
complex but very simple forms as well, like that we can actually advance things, and be,
yes,
part of that
yeah,
legacy of Susie and her family as well. Um,
exactly.
is there anything else that you'd like to share with us? And I'll just ask Gary too if he has no questions coming in. Okay. We'll give a little bit of time in case someone has a question, but is there anything
Sure.
else
Well,
you'd like to share? Something coming
yeah,
up, 16 days of activism, or
yes,
what's to come in next year?
yeah, absolutely. Yes. So we are planning work around 16 days of action. We'll be looking particularly around signing up to the convention, and that links up with our work around, safety, prevention of harassment in the workplace. And I know there's a focus there on the informal economy, and we know that many women are involved in that. So that kind of links with the work that we're doing around harassment, workplace safety. We'll also be looking at the use of some of the stalking protection orders and how useful they've been, some of the success stories, but also where there's room for improvement, and just linking up with organisations such as yourself and others to kind of reiterate messaging around the fact that stalking is a gendered crime, and we need that to be better recognised in the domestic abuse bill and other pieces of legislation. And then going into next year, we'll certainly be keeping up our focus on online safety and building up our relationships around that, and looking at the ways technology might be developed to address and support victims and address some of those issues. But yeah, just really to say that we're always open to learning more about what other organisations are doing around personal safety, stalking, harassment, any of the issues that overlap with ourselves. And if anyone has any questions or they want to just drop me a line, you can do that. My email is saskia.garner@susielamplugh.org. All our campaigns, our research, our podcasts are on our website, which is www.susielamplugh.org. And obviously we're on Twitter and Instagram, and our tag for that is @livelifesafe. So yeah, please get in touch. And yeah, thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been really, really great to talk to you. We look forward to working with Safe in the City over the coming months.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to speak with us and to share such a wealth of knowledge already that you've accumulated. And we'll make sure that we have all the links to those reports that you mentioned, the podcast,
Great,
your email. So
great.
if anyone has any questions, or you can always just
Sure,
ask us and we'll direct you to Saskia or one of her colleagues. And do make sure, if you do know somebody that is in trouble or concerned about stalking, that there is that national helpline that is
absolutely. Yeah,
available free of charge, and sounds like services are continuing on. So
absolutely. Yes.
fantastic. Well, have a great day and
Thanks so
weekend,
much.
and we'll speak to you soon.
Bye bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks for joining, everybody.
Bye.